All right, recently, the Embassy of Nigeria in the United States organized what it called the U.S. Nigeria Investment Summit, trying to attract some of the Nigerians out there in Nigeria, in the U.S., to come back home to invest. How are you tapping into that opportunity?
The Nigerian embassy in the U.S. is not the only embassy that organizes events. In fact, most embassies, most Nigerian embassies now understand that their role is not just one of diplomacy, but they have a responsibility for economic diplomacy. And most would write to us, most would work with us, and we work closely with them to try to ensure the success of the event. We work with the equivalents in their countries to ensure that we have deep access to the potential investor universe that exists in those countries. But my advice to all Nigerian missions, given NIPC's mandate of encouraging, of promoting, and of coordinating investments, is that we work closely with them to ensure the success of any events that they organize that are aimed at attracting investors.
Okay, so how much is the NIPC targeting as inflows in domestic direct investment?
I actually don't have a number for domestic direct investments. The expectation, though, because we were not tracking this before, so it's difficult to give a number to what you were not tracking before. But when we look at investment flows, we want to not only track the domestic direct investor portion, but ensure that the total pot of direct investment is growing and that the domestic direct investor part of it is also growing. NIPC started in January last year to track investment announcements. We understand that they're only investment announcements and they don't translate to, they don't necessarily suggest actual investment. But we thought it was important, once you start tracking the announcements, you can then follow these announcements and work with them, to try to translate those announcements to investments. And those announcements, from what we've gathered, the bulk of the announcements that were made in 2017, relate to announcements made by Nigerians investing in their own country or with intention to invest in their own country. That's one indication, if you like, of domestic direct investment. But we're still trying to find the best way to track it. What we just want is that the numbers are growing, not only for the domestic portion, but for the total portion of direct investments that come into the country, or indeed for the total portion of investments that come into the country, whether they're direct or portfolio.
Okay, so going by the data collection capability of the NIPC, what does your database say about potential investors?
So in 2017, we tracked 112 investment projects in 26 states and the FCT. And it was a total of $66.36 billion of investment announcements that we saw. In Q1 2018, our newsletter, which is the basis that we use for tracking these investment announcements, our newsletter saw over $17 billion of investment announcements in Q1 2017. This is almost 3 times the 6.3 odd billion that we saw in investment announcements in Q1 2017. So that tells us that investor interest, investor inquiries, investor intentions towards Nigeria are increasing. And our object as the years progress is that we will not only be able to tell you about the announcements, which are mere intentions when they're announced, but about the translation of those announcements to actual investments. We'll be able to do that as we continue to gather the data.
All right, in all of this drive, what tenure are you looking at? Are you after investors who are in for long haul or medium-term investors?
We need investors across the entire investment spectrum. Direct investors break ground generally. So even as your previous guest said, when government policy creates new opportunities for the development of sectors, direct investors are the ones that go in that translates those policies to real businesses that portfolio investors with time can then invest in. If we target only the short end, we will miss out on long-dated investors. If we target only long-dated investors, we miss out on the short end. The universe of portfolio investors that we get now only exists because direct investors broke ground in the first instance. I believe that we need short-term investors, we need medium-term investors, and we need long-term investors, each one playing the role that they should in the spectrum of the life cycle of an investment.
Now,
so it is impossible for a direct investor, for instance, to have a short-term perspective. They need a long-term one, whereas a portfolio investor can have a short-term perspective and trade in and out as the opportunities exist.
Okay, so each state government has its own areas of advantage. What's the strategy to identify each state's forte in this regard?
I'm so happy you asked that question. One of the initiatives that we're working on is to summarize the investment prospects of every single state in Nigeria. We've completed that exercise for a handful of states. But when we're done with it, the object is that we will have a book of states, 36 states across Nigeria, and provide some basic information that investors would ask for about the state, relating to the economy of the state, relating to the population in the state, demography, and the economic power of the residents of that state, but also showing the competitive advantages that a particular state has and the investment opportunities that that state has. For completeness, we're including in it the World Bank subnational ease of doing business ranking that will give investors a sense of which states are the most convenient on what parameter that the World Bank measures. But the object is on one sheet of paper to provide investors a rounded view of the investment opportunities in the state, of the basic information that they need to consider a state as an investment prospect, and of the investment possibilities in that particular state. And this engagement, the draft that we have, we've been working with states, again, on a state-by-state basis, because even though NIPC is the one preparing this information, we want the contents of that document to be owned by the states.
All right, thank you very much for your time. This is Yawande Sadiku. She's the Executive Secretary and the CEO of Nigeria Investment Promotion Council. A quick break now. When we come back, we do the pre-market open analysis. Just stay with us.